Hey guys, just letting you know that I had recorded this video right around the time I saw Brave New World, but because of my cold or flu or whatever I had around that time, I wasn't able to get it up before I saw Brave New World. I also sound a little bit off in this video. I was kind of getting over my cold, or at least starting to get over it. So if I sound not 100%, that's why. My apologies for getting this out as late as I did, and I'm going to try to use this as a way to lead up to Thunderbolts later this year, along with revisiting Falcon and Winter Soldier. And my Daredevil series of reviews, it's going to be shifted around to coincide as I watch Daredevil Born Again. I'll explain that more coming up soon when I talk about the 2003 Daredevil. So that's all I got. Thanks, and enjoy! Hey guys, I'm back with another review for you by revisiting Captain America Civil War from 2016. Everybody from the Avengers is in this, along with a couple of new faces in here, as if we were following it along the way at that time by 2016 anyway. But let's take a look back at Captain America Civil War almost 9 years later. With spoilers and all, this movie is my favorite solo MCU project, besides No Way Home and the first Iron Man, and even the second Captain America. Taking place after the events of Age of Ultron, the Avengers are split in two over a certain set of accords called the Sokovia Accords, which vocalizes a certain backlash from various world governments and the world population over the collateral damage that was done during the Avengers' activities in New York, Sokovia, and other places. Not just on a global scale, but the Avengers, in particular Iron Man and Captain America, have to deal with some personal turmoil of their own, leading to a pretty big rift among the Avengers team. The movie Civil War is named after a famous storyline in the Marvel Comics called Civil War. Basically, the superheroes of the world registering their secret identities to the public, so that way the government can keep them on record if they need them or something for some kind of activity. I don't know exactly what it is. I know a couple of comic book nerds that follow me in here could probably tell me, so if you could let me know, just let me know. This movie takes it in a very different direction though, but similar I think to the comic book storyline, some of the heroes are for registration while the others are not. There's been some criticism over the years of certain creative choices about the Sokovia Accords and how it doesn't really play much into the finale of the film, and that it's really just an excuse to lead us to some big action sequence at the airport in Germany. There was also a lot of worry going into this at the time that this was going to be a very jumbled mess like Spider-Man 3, even with the fears that people had over the first Avengers film, that there was way too many characters. But now, of course, we know that Marvel can hire the right creative minds in order to properly balance out all these big, larger-than-life characters, and can give each one of them at least some kind of an arc to go on. Now that we've seen it in other films, I don't really get that worried about it, but I guess for me, it all depends on who's making it. Certain members of the Avengers are in Lagos, tracking Crossbones, or Rumlow from Hydra, who is also a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, and he only makes this one appearance in the opening sequence of the film. The action scene itself has a very similar feel to Winter Soldier. The Russo brothers return behind the camera once again. It's a very intense and shaky feel, but it's done a lot better in this one because you could actually see more of what's happening, while still maintaining some of that disoriented sensibility. Sam Wilson is now part of the team using his high-tech gadgets, along with Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch, using her powers to subdue any opponents that come their way. Must say, it proves to be very useful, as long as you don't upset her in the process. Captain America corners Crossbones, sees him all scarred up, but then he mentions Bucky, which distracts Steve for a moment, and he attempts to kill himself along with Captain America, but Wanda, using her powers, stops him, accidentally throwing him up next to a busy office building, and causing civilian casualties. I really like how they handle that scenario. This kind of stuff happens a lot in comic book movies where there's a big battle that's happening in a largely populated area, and we don't really hear that often about the collateral damage that comes with it. The film takes the time to address those things by showing not just the political consequences, but the personal consequences that come with it. Now that I think about it, it kind of feels like a really big jab at Man of Steel, because a lot of people at the time criticized Man of Steel for Metropolis getting really screwed over by the big battle between Superman and Zod, and Superman didn't really seem to care about what was happening. Not to get started on that topic or anything. Scarlet Witch's response feels very visceral, but also very underplayed properly. It'd be easy for her to just have a big meltdown over what she did, but after what she experienced losing her brother and her home, she's kind of been through some shit at this point, excuse the word, but she still is bothered by the fact that she caused harm to other people. Then we get to see Tony Stark presenting this holographic memory of his younger self saying goodbye to his parents before they left, or it's a dream scenario that he wishes happened when he said goodbye to his parents. And showing a young Robert Downey Jr. as old as he was in the 1980s, I think they took some cues from his portrayal of Charlie Chaplin in the movie Chaplin. I haven't seen that movie, but I've seen how he looked back then. Once again, the people who do the digital makeup at Marvel, that is pretty spot on. And I remember very specifically, I thought, what? Oh my god, they actually de-aged him. Whoever's doing that there at your studios, Marvel, please don't get rid of them. But as he leaves this presentation that he's giving at MIT, he's confronted by this character played by Alfre Woodard, who works for the State Department, who reveals that her son was killed in Sokovia during the battle between the Avengers and Ultron, and she blames Tony for her son's death. She, along with Secretary Ross, are the poster children for how the world, or certain people around the world, are responding to the Avengers' lack of concern over the collateral damage that was done, and knowing how Tony feels about certain things, he takes this guilt pretty hard. Probably still reeling from the fact that he created a dangerous robot that could have destroyed the world, but it also led to the death of this woman's son. Then Secretary Ross, played by William Hurt, shows up to present the Avengers all the footage from all the battles that they have fought in, leading to some of the collateral damage on the ground, including the Battle of New York, offering them a chance to continue what they're doing as long as they sign the Sokovia Accords. The way that this footage is shown to all the people in the room, I think it's a very simple yet effective way of showing the consequences of the actions of the Avengers, and this leads to a pretty big argument amongst the team. But each character is shown to be reasonable in their stances. Rhodey and Sam are members of the Air Force, but Rhodey's a lot more qualified in the fact that he's risen through the ranks and has served not just on a military level, but on a government level, so he understands the political consequences that come with it, while Sam has been a basic airman or a grunt, for a lack of a better term, and not for 1 second does he really trust the government. Kind of like how Captain America has felt in light of the events of the Winter Soldier. Seeing how Hydra infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D. for many decades, he's instantly wary of putting his trust in the government, seeing how far they're willing to go with their corruption. Whilst Tony, on the other hand, was very distrustful of the government, refusing to give up his weapons to that senator, but now having seen the consequences of his actions, he realizes that he has to be reined in. Even Vision has something insightful to share.
Our very strength invites challenge. Challenge incites conflict. And conflict breeds catastrophe.
Kind of like how in various interpretations of Batman where all these villains pop up in Gotham, and it does beg the question, is it because of the corruption that's running throughout the city? Or is Batman really the cause of it all? Hugo Strange says in Batman Arkham City, look at the Joker. Would he exist if it hadn't been for you? And even Spider-Man in Spider-Man 3, when he fights Sandman, he says, where do all these guys come from? That's kind of a common thing with superhero properties anyway, or superhero stories. If you were to ask me personally, who do I side with? Is it really that obvious? I'm Team Captain, because in his case, with his experience, he has every reason to not trust the government after how he saw Hydra infiltrate S.H.I.E.L.D. But I also understand Tony's side of the argument. He was very reckless, and he didn't really care who it affected, and when he saw what his weapons were capable of, he cut off that supply chain. Then Steve gets some pretty big news that Peggy Carter has passed away in her sleep from old age. He, along with Sam Wilson, go to attend the funeral and gets a big surprise that Agent 13 is actually Peggy's niece, Sharon Carter, but offering some words of wisdom that Steve really needs to hear and solidifying his stance on the Sokovia Accords.
It is your duty to plant yourself like a tree, look them in the eye and say no. You move.
Those are some pretty wise words. It can all feel very overwhelming when someone is coming at you with a different set of ideas. Even if you actually think that you're going crazy for a moment, at some point you have to be your own person and stay solid in who you are and say, this is where I stand. If you don't like it, tough. But I also really like that Black Widow comes to comfort Steve even though she's deciding to sign the Accords. She still feels some compassion for him as a friend, even if they don't see eye to eye on this situation. I mean, it's one of those things that you can care about somebody while still not seeing eye to eye with them about something. I have plenty of people that I don't see eye to eye with on certain topics, or political stuff especially, but when something comes up that affects me on a personal level, they will reach out and check in on me to see if I'm okay. Shows you that tribal differences are not as important as the human connection. But then we're brought to Vienna to sign the Accords, and we're introduced to Prince T'Challa of Wakanda, played by the late Chadwick Boseman. Oh, I gotta tell you, this was pretty big, watching it last night. Chadwick Boseman, man. What a tragedy. Before this movie, I had no clue about who Black Panther was as a character. Chadwick Boseman I had seen in the movie 42 where he played Jackie Robinson, but he really blew my mind on how capable he was. He's not in the movie for that much or for very long even, but it's just enough there to give us an understanding as to why he's there in the first place. Similar to Age of Ultron, this movie serves as an introduction to Black Panther along with Spider-Man, showing us just enough of who they are as characters at that point in time in the universe. There's an explosion that happens at this building, killing his father, King T'Chaka of Wakanda, causing him to go on a revenge path against Bucky Barnes, who's being labeled as the main culprit of the bombing. With the help of Sam Wilson and Sharon Carter, in secret anyway, he finds Bucky hiding in Bucharest, slowly starting to regain his full memories of what was happening. But then we get a really awesome sequence of the German Special Forces closing in to capture Bucky. Black Panther in these action sequences, I forgot just how awesome and scary he is in these scenarios. I mean, when those claws are out, you better run. And it's at this point where I think the action starts to get better. There's not as much shaky cam in this situation. I think the Russo brothers got a lot better helming action sequences. If I had to guess, maybe they had some proper coaching in order to show the action sequences and how to make them feel organic in the process, so that way the audience can stay engaged. But it's not just them showing how intense Black Panther is. Bucky is still someone that's pretty hard to lock down because you don't really know what he might do. The programming that was put into his mind by Hydra is still there, and as they show in the opening scene of the film when he's in this secret base in Siberia, if you say certain phrases or words, it awakens the Winter Soldier mindset in his brain that was implanted into him by Arnim Zola when he was captured. Even just saying one word or phrase offhand could set him off into the Winter Soldier mode. And that metal arm is not something that you want to mess with. I may or may not have talked about this, but Sebastian Stan is really, really great as the Winter Soldier. I really like his nonchalant demeanor, because it does give off the impression that you might not want to cross this guy, but if he was in the right frame of mind, it's someone that you could definitely have on your side if you need him. And from what I can tell, he, along with Anthony Mackie, looks like a really cool guy. And if any one of those guys were at Comic-Con in Philly, New York, or Baltimore even, I'd go meet him and get a photo with them. But then they get stopped by the authorities, led by War Machine or Rhodey. Bucky gets captured and put into a box, where the agent in charge is Everett Ross, played by Martin Freeman, who is known as Bilbo Baggins in The Hobbit. So Secretary Ross wants to prosecute Captain America, but at the request of Tony Stark, decides to give him a shot so that Tony can maybe reason with him by showing him the 2 pens from the Lend-Lease agreement that FDR signed with the UK during the Second World War. And what I really like is that Steve doesn't really care if he gets branded as a fugitive or not. All he cares about is his friend Bucky, because after losing Peggy, Bucky's the only connection to the past that he has left, and he'll do anything to protect his friend. And this scene also shows just how different Steve and Tony are, really. Tony's very jealous of Cap since his father, Howard, kept talking about him so much when he knew him during the war. And when Steve realizes that Tony is having Wanda put on lockdown after what happened, right when he starts to consider signing the deal, he immediately draws a line when he hears what Tony's done to Wanda. I actually kind of relate to what Steve says here, because I've had instances, or I've seen a few things happen with people that I know that we don't really see eye to eye on. And just when I start to think that, okay, maybe they're seeing it from the same way as I do, but then something comes up and they say or do a certain thing and I go, oh my God, what? Every time I think you start to see things the right way. I'm trying not to get on my soapbox about that one, but you guys could probably fill the gaps in your mind on what I'm talking about. But then a certain individual sneaks into the building, played by Daniel Bruhl, who is now known as Baron Zemo, who has a certain endgame of his own, and is constantly asking throughout the film, Mission Report, December 16, 1991. Which was shown in the opening scene of the film, when he goes on an assassination mission, but we don't see who he's killing, but that all comes into play later, though. He says the key phrase is to awaken the Winter Soldier, causing him to escape, and almost every Avenger in the building, except for Steve and Sam, want to take him down. Tony tries to get his hands on him by using an Iron Man glove, gets his hand on the gun that Bucky uses, while Bucky fires the gun into his hand, manages to stop the bullet, but the look on Tony's face makes me shudder in fear along with him. Bucky momentarily manages to snap out of that trance, and through Bucky they discover there's a secret Winter Soldier program that Hydra was creating back in the day, that Baron Zemo was asking about. They come up with a plan to tell Tony and the rest of the Avengers what's happening, but they decide to recruit somebody that Sam actually knows. Then back at the agency, Tony and Black Widow are discussing who they could bring in on their side, leading us to Queens, where we meet a young Peter Parker, played by Tom Holland. I'll never forget that feeling I felt almost 9 years ago. I was so over the moon. This introduction of Peter Parker is exactly what Spider-Man needed at that time. At this point, he's already been through the spider bite, Uncle Ben, discovering his powers, and all that other stuff. According to the movie, he's had his powers at this point for about 6 months, and it's revealed that Tony has been kind of watching him or observing him. And some people have asked throughout the years, how did Tony Stark know that Peter Parker was Spider-Man? I mean, well, first of all, does it really matter? I mean, maybe it kind of does, yes, but if someone who is that intelligent and had all these resources, living in a city like New York, was aware of all these big superhumans running around the world, and from other planets as well, probably was keeping an eye on certain things throughout the city, looking for possible new recruits maybe? I mean, it's one way to look at it. I mean, let's be real here. There's always these leaps in logic that happen in superhero stories where How could you not know that this person is that person in costume? It's always a lame excuse that in reality no one would be able to fall for. But you inevitably have to accept it most of the time because otherwise it's not as fun. It's actually kind of refreshing at this point in the series to not have at least one person whose identity is outed to the world. So, you're the Spiderling. Crime-fighting spider. You're Spider-Boy? Spider-Man. Not in that onesie you're not. It's not a onesie. You're in dire need of an upgrade. Systemic, top to bottom, that's why I'm here. I'm telling you, Robert Downey Jr. never ceased an opportunity to make me laugh. Even if Captain America's my favorite in the MCU, Iron Man comes pretty close in a lot of ways, mostly because of his quick wit humor. I always get a kick out of that kind of humor anyway. And there's no other person that can deliver it as well as RDJ. And another thing about this scene that I've heard a lot of criticism for throughout the years, why doesn't he go talk to Daredevil or Luke Cage? Because if he did, it'd be a whole argument of, well, why am I doing this? I don't understand. Also, Peter is 16 years old. He's a kid. A child is a lot more easier to manipulate. Say that, I don't know, Mark Cuban or Bill Gates were to walk into your room and say, "Hi, I'm so-and-so. Would you like to come work for my company?" And if you were a kid in high school or middle school, wouldn't you be that excited to jump at the possibility of working for them? I know I would. And Peter is someone who clearly looks up to Tony Stark. If that retroactively changed scene in Iron Man 2 is any indication, he's always looked up to him. So if he sees his idol sitting in his living room talking to his Aunt May, why should he not fanboy out and take an opportunity to join his idol in a fight? Of course he would. Because not only is this scene a perfect showcase of who Peter Parker is and summing up everything we need to know about him, I also think it's a pretty big insight on Tony's own moral code and how far he's willing to go to achieve what he wants to happen. We can all relate to Tony and we all find him reasonably likable, but sometimes his actions are very morally ambiguous or reprehensible. The fact that he's willing to draw a young child into a really dangerous situation, yeah, that's not exactly something that deserves a lot of praise. But he's also motivated by guilt, which is the same thing that Peter Parker experienced when he lost his Uncle Ben. It helps Tony see something in this kid that nobody else probably would. And while you could say that the scene is a very studio-required moment, well, yeah, it is. But I also think it feels very organic. After everything that we had gone through with the Spider-Man movies up until then, and definitely after what happened with Amazing Spider-Man 2 2 years prior to this, Sony was in a really bad position and trying to find some way to move forward. All it takes is Marvel to reach out their hand and say, "Hey, guys, do you need some help?" But just to see how it all plays out in retrospect, it was kind of neat to see the start of it all. I also really like how Tony provides Peter Parker his suit. Because how is it that someone who is a teenager in high school with very limited resources, no money, and no job would be able to create something of that high quality? I'm sure there's a set of ways that you could showcase how that happens, but most kids are not that lucky. I know I wasn't. Personally, I don't really care how he gets the costume, but the fact that they show Tony giving him the suit, at least in the movies anyway, I was really happy that that mystery was finally solved. But then there's the airport battle in Germany. This is one of the best action sequences I've ever witnessed in film. With all the character buildup that we've experienced at this point in the film, seeing it all come to a head with them clashing with each other, I honestly felt like a little kid watching this. I was about 26 years old at the time when I saw this, now I'm 34. Even then at both times, I felt like a little kid. Seeing Spider-Man interacting with Tony Stark and Captain America, all the other characters just butting heads with each other, there's no other feeling like it, and it's almost impossible to put into words. You also have the inclusion of Paul Rudd's Ant-Man. Given how he broke into the Avengers headquarters and encountered Sam Wilson in upstate New York, it would make sense for him to want to recruit Ant-Man in this situation. Even though I really like what Chadwick Boseman and Tom Holland bring here, Paul Rudd arguably has the best moments and the best lines. If I were helping the Avengers, that would probably be me. Just eating up every single moment that I get to spend with my heroes. Who's speaking? It's your conscience. We don't talk a lot these days. Oh, and Jeremy Renner's Hawkeye returns to help Wanda get out of that situation from Vision. And he has a couple of cool moments too. And I think that this was the MCU really improving and making sure that Hawkeye was more awesome than we realized in the beginning with the first Avengers. Oh, and I have to mention this moment involving Sam, Bucky, and Spider-Man.
You have a metal arm? That is awesome, dude! You have the right to remain silent!
What? Oh, and to pause on the sequence for a second, this movie also reminds me of how much I love the dynamic between Sam and Bucky. Sebastian Stan and Anthony Mackie bounce off each other superbly. Gave me flashbacks to the Falcon and Winter Soldier and just how naturally they feel off of each other. Bucky has more of an emotional connection to Steve, but Sam and Steve feel an emotional connection too, even though it's very different. And also to rewind for a second, when Bucky and Sam are watching Steve say goodbye to Sharon Carter and they share a kiss with each other, the looks that they give him are perfect. In that situation, that would be my dad and his brothers, my uncles, smiling in approval if I was having a romantic moment with another woman. And to address something about that moment, Sharon Carter having a kiss with Steve Rogers, okay, yeah, that is a little gross in hindsight because that's technically his niece now. But there was some criticism, I think, even from Haley Atwell. Peggy had already died by then. As far as he knew at that point in time, he was stuck in the modern era. So really, he was doing whatever he could to find some kind of normal connection in the world that he was living in, because he didn't know that he was going to be able to go back in time and have another chance to live his life. I understand if now you have a problem with it, but at that point, not knowing what we didn't know before, to me anyway, it makes perfect sense. But back to the airport battle. At a certain point, the fight gets a lot more intense. Spider-Man and Steve have a few moments together, and then they realize they're both from the same city. Even though Spider-Man is not Team Cap, Cap comes to respect Spider-Man, seeing his fighting heart, just like he had before he joined the army. And it's not only the fact that Paul Rudd has the best lines, but he also turns into the Giant Man. That was pretty shocking at the time. Even now is still jaw-dropping. Okay, Tiny Dude is big now. He's big now. Give me back my Rhodey. And it leads to the best, and I mean the best, Star Wars reference this guy has ever heard.
Ever seen that really old movie? Empire Strikes Back? You know that part? Where they're on the snow planet? With the walking thingies!
But there's so many moments that I could talk about with this whole airport battle. From seeing one side of Team Cap facing off against the other side of Team Iron Man, which I remember very specifically in the Super Bowl trailer at the time, it clearly edited out Spider-Man's place on that side of the aisle. Another showcase that Marvel's very good at keeping secrets, just like they did with their Endgame trailers some time ago. Oh, and this moment?
Does anyone have any orange slices?
What does that have to do with anything? But then it gets to this moment where Vision accidentally shoots Rhodey out of the sky. I think we all knew that Rhodey wasn't going to die, but seeing Tony shaken like that, it does, I think, further add to his layer of guilt. That all of this is happening on his watch. Everything that he did in Age of Ultron, or his activities as Iron Man, has led to this moment as well. But then he gets the information that Bucky was indeed framed by Baron Zemo. After showing the recent evidence to Sam Wilson in the raft, Sam tells him where Steve and Bucky are going. So he takes off with Black Panther right behind him in secret. So they meet up with each other in Siberia, discovering all the secret Winter Soldiers have been killed by Baron Zemo. And it's revealed that Zemo is from Sokovia, and he lost his family during the Battle of Sokovia against Ultron. And it's not the usual revenge that he wants against the Avengers. He wants to see them tear each other apart. And that's the only way he knows that the Avengers can crumble for good. Showing him footage of that assassination that we saw earlier on in the film. But Tony recognizes that location, and it's revealed that the victims in the car were Tony's parents that were killed by the Winter Soldier. One of you guys pointed this out to me, that this reveal was like the I am your father of the 21st century. I'm inclined to agree with that. This was a pretty big surprise, and I'll never forget the response I had when I realized what was happening.
What is this?
Oh no! I still remember specifically, my mom saw this with me and she turned to me and said, What? Bucky killed Tony's mom and dad! And she went, oh, no! No words spoken, but all the emotions in each of the characters' faces, from Steve to Tony and Bucky, all speak wonders. But what really gets me is Bucky's response. He remembers all of the victims that he killed throughout the years. He even said to Steve on the way over to the base that, yeah, it wasn't me, but I still did it. He doesn't even try to excuse himself. He's basically owning his own part in it, saying, yeah, it was me. I did it. Naturally, Tony lashes out, wanting blood. And it's perfectly understandable as to why. And I really like how this film just ends with the three of them battling it out. Not just some big battle in the sky or a big battle in the city with a beam going up. This is a personal one, because not only is Tony wanting to kill Bucky for what he did, he's also mad at Steve for not telling him the truth. And Steve is going to do whatever he can to protect his friend. And what I have been able to pick up on throughout the years, and I think it became a little more clear for me on rewatch, why is this film called Civil War if it's not really about the Sokovia Accords? Personally, what I think it is, it's a civil war that goes on inside of us. We all have good intentions, but we also have bad impulses. And it begs the question of, if we're put into a set of circumstances or a situation that could really challenge us, can we still do the right thing? And the film doesn't really definitively generally answer the question for everybody, but it shows that everybody responds in their own way. Throughout the film, we see a lot of conflict with most of the main characters, that they understand the other side of the argument, but they also want to stay true to what they believe. Like with Black Widow wanting to stay loyal to her friend Cap, but realizing that they've made some big mistakes along the way and they need to be held back. Vision uses logic and reason in order to want to sign the Sokovia Accords, but his connection with Wanda makes him question otherwise. Steve is ultimately able to do the right thing, even though he comes really close to crossing that line. Tony, I would not put it past him to go over that line anyway. He's done some morally reprehensible things, so I think that if it hadn't been for Cap, Bucky would be dead by now. And seeing Iron Man going down to his knees, being pummeled by Steve and Bucky, the emotions that I felt, even now, I'm not going to be able to articulate. But what really gets me about this scene is Black Panther choosing to not let vengeance consume him. When we hear from Baron Zemo, as he's listening to this old message from his wife, he planned all of this out in order to get the Avengers to destroy themselves at the right moment. You could say that that is a little bit too much of a leap. It's like he knew exactly how Tony was going to respond to this and how Cap was going to respond by protecting his friend. But it also shows just how smart and calculated he really is and how motivated he is by his own desire for vengeance and his own personal pain. That he, along with Tony, is not really capable of doing the right thing, at least not in that situation anyway, up until Falcon and Winter Soldier, but that's another story. Because beforehand, when Black Panther was following them from behind, he overhears Zemo reveal that he framed Bucky with the death of T'Chaka. When he sees how far things have gone, he decides that he's not going to follow the same path as Tony and Zemo.
It's consuming them. I'm done letting it consume me.
Watching Chadwick Boseman's acting in that moment, so subtle, yet so powerful all at once. Man, do I miss that guy. And I hope that wherever he is on the other side, he's finally found some peace. The Avengers are no longer together. They're in their own separate corners right now. And this has some pretty big ramifications for the future events of the MCU. A lot of people criticize this film for being too safe and too cookie cutter. In a way, yeah, maybe you could argue that based on what I said. And if you actually watch the film, I personally don't think it really comes off that way at all. Because a lot of other movies like this would be really tempted to keep the team together. This film shows, no, let's show the other side of that. So Tony helps Rhodey recover from his injury and gets a package from a FedEx guy who's played by Stan Lee, mispronouncing his name, and Rhodey tries really hard to make that work. And it's a flip phone and a letter from Steve Rogers, who offers his apologies and telling him that he'll always be around should he need him for anything. And even though Tony is not willing to take that chance, there is still something inside of him that makes him realize that he might have gone too far and may or may not be willing to reach out to Steve in the future. There is a long way to go, but not all hope is lost. And then, of course, we get the two post-credit scenes, with the first one setting up Black Panther's film and him giving help to Bucky Barnes in order to get the programming from Hydra out of his mind. Of course, knowing how secretive Wakanda is, safe to say that Steve and Bucky were in good hands, and there's really nothing to worry about. And the post-credit scene is Peter Parker sitting in his bedroom experimenting with the spider signal that we had seen in the comics, but I don't think they even really showed it in the movies as much outside of this. It's in vain of the typical mid-credits, post-credit scene. The mid-credit scene is usually something that's going to lead into the next thing that's coming up, and the last one is just really either a joke or just something really fun or nice to add on to it. Still, just seeing how everything played out in hindsight, it's cool to see the genesis of this Peter 1 going on his journey, if you know what I mean. So yeah, really, at the end of the day, Captain America Civil War is, I would say, among the best solo projects that the MCU has put out there. Properly showing the divide between superheroes, which I know a lot of people would not like that idea. This came out in the same year as Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Well, not to get too deep into that. And even then, people were still complaining about how superheroes shouldn't fight each other. But if you have some sort of humanity in there, inevitably there's going to be conflict. So I really like how this movie does address that. Not just with the score and the action, but the thematic elements that it brings up too, and properly not giving the one-size-fits-all answer for everybody involved. Ironically, this is actually a better Avengers film than Age of Ultron was. So those are my thoughts on Captain America Civil War. Thank you guys so much for watching. Comment below and tell me what your thoughts are on this movie. Thanks again, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.